When my husband confessed his love for another woman, it wasn't the words that broke me. It was the way he said them. Calm, almost relieved, as if he'd been waiting for this moment his entire life. We were sitting at the long oak table in our dining room, the same one that had seen 40 years of birthdays, report cards, and Sunday dinners. The candles flickered between us, throwing light across his silver hair. Our children, Eli and Grace, were sitting across from us, their glasses of champagne still half full, their smiles frozen mid-celebration. He cleared his throat once, twice. Then he looked at me, not with guilt, not even with shame, but with something softer. "I want to be honest," he said. "I've loved another woman all these years." Silence fell like a curtain. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator in the next room. Grace blinked first, setting her fork down with a soft clink. Eli's jaw tightened. But me? I just smiled. A small, knowing smile that felt both foreign and powerful on my lips. I slid the tan folder across the table toward him. "I know," I whispered. "This is for you." He hesitated before opening it. His fingers trembled as he lifted the first page. His face went pale, like the life drained straight out of him. That was the night everything ended. And strangely enough, it was also the night I began to live again. If you'd seen us a month before that dinner, you'd have thought we were the perfect couple. Everyone did. Robert and I had been married 40 years. High school sweethearts who'd built a life brick by brick. He was a professor at the local college, admired by everyone for his calm, steady nature. I was a retired schoolteacher who spent her days tending roses and baking too many pies. Our home sat on a quiet cul-de-sac in North Carolina, where the air smelled faintly of pine and evening rain. To our neighbors, we were the couple that had made it. We hosted backyard barbecues every summer. We sent out Christmas cards with matching sweaters. We laughed easily, fought rarely, and loved quietly. At least, that's what they saw. Behind closed doors, things had started to shift in subtle ways, like tiny cracks appearing beneath a coat of perfect paint. It began with the silence. Not the comfortable kind that comes with years of knowing someone, but the distant kind. The kind that makes you wonder if your voice still matters in your own home. Robert would come home later than usual, mumbling something about department meetings. He'd eat dinner distracted, his phone face down beside his plate. When I tried to start conversations, he'd nod absently, eyes elsewhere. Still, I told myself it was normal. 40 years is a long time. People grow quiet. They drift a little. Every morning, I'd wake before him and make coffee. I'd set his mug black, no sugar, on the counter just the way he liked it. I'd watch him grab it without a word, kiss the top of my head, and leave. And every time that door clicked shut, I'd tell myself, this is just a season. It'll pass. But deep down, I knew something had changed. It wasn't until I found the note that everything started to unravel. It was a Thursday afternoon, late summer. The kind of day where the sunlight feels lazy, slipping through the blinds in golden stripes. I was changing the sheets in our bedroom when I noticed a small folded paper tucked between the nightstand and the wall. I thought it was one of Robert's lecture notes, so I picked it up without thinking. But the handwriting wasn't his. It was delicate, slanted, a woman's hand. "You looked handsome today. I wish I could have told you that in person." Counting down the days until next weekend. There was no name, no signature. Just that single sentence written on hotel stationery. For a moment, I just stood there, the sheets slipping from my hands. My first thought wasn't he's cheating. It was maybe it's a misunderstanding. But then I noticed the hotel's name, Marigold Inn. A place I'd never been. A place that wasn't part of any conference he'd ever mentioned. I folded the note carefully and slipped it into my pocket. That night, I said nothing. I made dinner as usual, roast chicken, his favorite, and we sat across from each other like two polite strangers. He asked about the garden. I told him the hydrangeas were late to bloom this year. He nodded, smiled faintly, and went back to his plate. But every word he spoke felt like an act. Every look, a rehearsed gesture. When he went to bed, I stayed up, sitting in the living room with the note in my lap. I watched the clock tick past midnight. And that's when I made a promise to myself. I wouldn't confront him with accusations. I'd wait. I'd listen. And when the truth came out, I'd be ready. What I didn't know was how deep the truth ran, or how long he'd been keeping it buried. The following week, I started noticing the small things, the ones that only a wife of 40 years would see. The faint trace of unfamiliar perfume clinging to his collar. The sudden care he took with his appearance, trimming his beard more often, switching to a cologne he'd never worn before. And the way he smiled when reading a text, just barely. A secret smile that didn't belong to me. He'd been distant before, yes, but now it felt deliberate. As if he was protecting something precious from me. Or someone. One night, I walked into his study to bring him a cup of tea. He startled, actually startled, like a child caught stealing cookies. His laptop screen went dark with a single tap, too quickly, too smoothly. "Long day?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. He cleared his throat. "Just finishing grades." "Go on to bed, Mary." "Grades," I repeated softly, setting the cup down beside him. "It's summer, Robert." He didn't answer. Just looked up, forced a small smile, and said, "You're right. Habit, I suppose." That night, I lay awake listening to his breathing beside me. Even his sleep sounded different, shallow, restless, as if he was dreaming of another life entirely. I thought of the woman behind that note, what she looked like, whether she knew about me, about our home, about the 4 decades I'd spent being his everything. And that's when a strange kind of calm came over me. I decided I wasn't going to confront him in anger. I'd confront him in truth. The next morning, after he left for work, I opened his study door again. Robert was meticulous. He kept his life organized down to the smallest detail. Folders labeled by year, receipts clipped, photos stacked neatly in drawers. It didn't take long to find the folder. It was buried under financial documents in his cabinet, marked simply personal. Inside were old letters, years of them, each written in that same delicate handwriting. I sat down, my hands trembling, as I read the first one. "You make the world softer, Robert. Even when we can't be together, knowing you're out there makes me breathe easier." The postmark was from 23 years ago. 23 years. My heart dropped. This wasn't some midlife affair. This was a second life. I kept reading, letter after letter, each one filled with quiet affection, shared memories, secret meetings. There were references to our lake house weekends, to our song on the radio, to anniversaries, hers, not ours. And then one letter stopped me cold. "I wish you could have seen her graduate. She looks so much like you." Her. A daughter. My throat tightened. I flipped through the next few pages, desperate for clues. And then I saw it. A photograph tucked between the envelopes. A young woman in her 20s, smiling brightly at a college graduation, her arm around a middle-aged woman I didn't recognize. Robert was behind them, half-turned, his hand on the girl's shoulder. I'd never seen him look so alive. I don't know how long I sat there, staring at that photo. The light outside shifted from morning gold to late afternoon haze before I finally stood up. I felt hollow. Not furious. Not yet. Just emptied out. All those years I'd been making excuses for his distance, telling myself marriage had seasons. He'd been building another family in secret. I put the folder back exactly where I'd found it. Then I walked to the window and looked out at the garden I'd tended for decades. The wind rustled through the roses, soft and indifferent. And I thought to myself, so this is what betrayal looks like when it's quiet. For days I said nothing. I went about my routines like nothing had changed. Coffee at 7, walk at 9, dinner at 6. I smiled when he came home, listened when he spoke, even laughed at his jokes. But inside, something in me was planning. Not revenge, exactly. Something deeper. Something that would make him face what he'd done. Not with shouting or rage, but with truth he couldn't run from. So I started gathering things. Copies of the letters. Photographs. Bank statements that showed monthly transfers to an account I'd never seen before. And one more thing. A birth certificate. It took me a while to find it, but when I did, the air left my body. He'd listed himself as the father. The girl in the photo, the one who looked so much like him, was his daughter. Her mother's name was Elaine Turner. Elaine. The name meant nothing to me at first. But when I looked her up, the truth came crashing down like thunder. Elaine had been my best friend. We'd taught together at the same elementary school years ago. She'd left suddenly after her husband's death, saying she needed a new start in another town. I'd written her letters she never answered. I'd even sent a Christmas card once. All the while, she'd been building a secret life with my husband. That night, I sat on the porch long after Robert went to bed. The crickets sang in the distance, and I could hear the faint hum of the highway a few blocks away. My fingers traced the edge of that folder, the one that would later sit on our anniversary table. I realized then that I wasn't the same woman anymore. The years had taught me patience, but this taught me clarity. I didn't want to scream or destroy. I wanted him to see what he'd done. I wanted him to face the weight of it. His own deceit laid bare, word by word, in front of our children. So I waited for the right day, waited for our 40th anniversary, when the house would be full of the people who once believed our love was unbreakable. And when he raised that glass to toast our 40 years together, I'd be ready. Our 40th anniversary arrived on a cool October evening. The air carried that bittersweet scent of autumn, wood smoke, and dying leaves. I woke early that morning and baked the same lemon cake I'd made on our wedding day. Habit, maybe. Or maybe it was my way of saying goodbye to the woman I'd been. Robert came into the kitchen while I was dusting the cake with sugar. He kissed my cheek absently, the way you might greet a coworker, and said, 40 years. Can you believe it? I smiled. No, I really can't. He didn't notice the edge in my voice. He never did anymore. The children arrived just before 7. Grace, our oldest, came with her husband and their 2 teenagers. Eli brought his girlfriend, a sweet girl named June who always tried too hard to make me laugh. The house filled with laughter, with the smell of roasted chicken and cinnamon. It almost felt normal. Almost. Robert was in high spirits. Pouring wine, cracking jokes, the picture of a proud husband surrounded by family. Every now and then he'd glance at me, that same easy smile on his face. And I wondered if he felt even an ounce of guilt. After dinner, when the plates were cleared and everyone was leaning back with dessert, Grace raised her glass. To Mom and Dad, she said, her voice bright. 40 years of love, patience, and partnership. You two are our example of what marriage should be. Everyone clapped. Robert chuckled, shaking his head modestly. We've had our share of ups and downs, but yes, 40 years. That's something to celebrate. Then he stood. He tapped his glass lightly with a spoon. The room quieted. And that's when he said it. I want to be honest, he began, his voice suddenly heavy, thoughtful. There's something I've kept inside for too long. My heart didn't race. My hands didn't shake. Because I knew this moment was coming. He looked at me, directly at me, and said, I've loved another woman all these years. The silence that followed was almost holy. Grace's eyes widened, fork frozen midair. Eli sat back, disbelief written all over his face. Even the grandchildren stopped whispering. The candle between us flickered, its flame bending sideways as if it too was holding its breath. I felt the weight of 40 years pressing down on my shoulders. All the mornings I'd made him coffee. All the nights I'd waited for his key in the door. All the words I'd swallowed in the name of peace. But what came out of me was not anger. It was calm. A quiet calm that scared even me. I reached under the table, lifted the tan folder I'd kept hidden by my chair, and slid it toward him. I know, I whispered. This is for you. His expression faltered. What? Open it, I said softly. He hesitated, looking around the table. Our children were watching, confused, worried. Then he opened the folder. Inside was every letter, every photograph, every piece of proof of his second life. And right on top, the birth certificate. His hand began to shake. His eyes darted from the paper to me, then back again. Mary, he whispered, his voice breaking. Where did you? I found it in your study, I said. You didn't hide it very well. Grace leaned forward, her voice trembling. Dad, what is that? Robert didn't answer. So I did. It's the truth, I said simply. Your father has another family, a daughter, and her mother was my best friend. The room erupted in a mixture of gasps and silence. Grace covered her mouth. Eli muttered something under his breath and pushed his chair back, standing so abruptly it scraped against the floor. Robert reached for me, desperate. Mary, please, not like this. I looked him straight in the eyes. How else, Robert? How else should the truth look after hiding for 23 years? His lips trembled. He opened his mouth, but no words came. I loved you, I said, my voice steady but low. I built my life around you. And you turned our marriage into a secret I didn't even know I was keeping. He tried to speak again, but Grace's voice cut through the air. You had another child? Robert turned toward her, his face ashen. It's complicated. Complicated? She snapped. You lied to us. To Mom. For decades. Eli slammed his hand against the table. You made us think this was some perfect family. What were we supposed to believe now? The tension in the room grew so thick it felt like the air itself might split. I stood up slowly, my chair creaking against the hardwood floor. That's enough, I said. This isn't about anger anymore. It's about truth. Robert dropped his gaze to the folder again. His shoulders sagged, his whole frame collapsing under the weight of it. "I never meant to hurt you," he whispered. "You did anyway," I said, "because you thought silence would protect you. But silence only delays the breaking." For a moment, no one moved. Then Grace stood, tears streaking her face. She walked over to me and took my hand. "I'm so sorry, Mom," she said softly. I squeezed her fingers. "Don't be. I'm finally free." Robert sat down, head in his hands, as if the air around him had turned to lead. The candles burned low. The laughter from earlier had turned into heavy breathing and quiet sobs. And for the first time in years, I felt something close to peace. After the guests left, after Grace and Eli drove home in silence, Robert and I sat across from each other at the same table. He looked older somehow, as if the truth had aged him in a single night. "Was this revenge?" he asked quietly. "No," I said. "It was truth. You gave me lies for 23 years, Robert. I just gave them back to you in daylight." He nodded slowly, his eyes glassy. "I thought I could manage both lives. I thought she needed me. And what did I need?" I asked. "Did you ever ask yourself that?" He didn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "What happens now?" I stood and began gathering the plates. Now I start living for myself." He stayed seated as I walked away. And for the first time in 40 years, I didn't look back. The morning after that dinner, the house felt like a tomb. The dishes still sat in the sink. Half-melted candle wax streaked across the tablecloth. And Robert's chair, the one at the head of the table, was empty. He hadn't come to bed that night. I found him asleep on the couch in the den, still wearing his shirt from the party. A half-empty glass of whiskey on the table beside him. For a brief second, I thought about covering him with a blanket. Old habits die hard. But then I remembered the letters, the photo, the daughter. So I left him there. That day, Grace called. "Mom," she said quietly, her voice thick. "How are you?" "I'm all right," I lied. She hesitated before asking, "Are you going to leave him?" I looked out the window at the roses swaying in the morning breeze. "I don't know yet. I think I just need to breathe first." There was a long silence before she said, "I can't believe he did that to you. To us. Your father made choices that weren't yours to carry." I told her gently. "Don't let his sins become your burden." She started to cry then, softly. "You don't sound angry." "I was," I said. "But anger is just a visitor. It comes loud, and it leaves empty. I don't want to live with it." Over the next few days, word spread quietly through the family. Eli refused to speak to his father. Grace sent me articles about divorce lawyers, trying not to push but unable to help herself. Robert stayed in the house, moving through rooms like a ghost. He'd try to talk sometimes, but the words always fell short. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," he said one night while I was making tea. I didn't look at him. 23 years is pretty far, Robert. He sighed. She was lonely. Her husband died young. I was trying to help. I turned, meeting his eyes. "And in helping her, you destroyed me." He opened his mouth, then closed it again. There was nothing left to say. 2 weeks later, I packed a small bag and left. Not permanently. Not yet. I told him I needed space, time to think. I went to stay with Grace for a while, in her guest room with the yellow curtains and the smell of baby powder. She tried to make it comfortable, but every night I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, wondering how many years of my life had been built on someone else's lie. During the days, I walked. Long walks through her neighborhood, down streets lined with maple trees, the crunch of leaves beneath my shoes. It was on one of those walks that I realized something important. I hadn't laughed, really laughed, in years. Not since before the silence began. Robert hadn't stolen that from me. I'd given it up without noticing. I'd shrunk myself to fit the small space his love left behind. That thought hurt, but it also set me free. A month passed before I went back to the house. It felt different, colder, quieter. His shoes weren't by the door. His jacket wasn't on the hook. He'd moved out temporarily, it seemed. There was a note on the kitchen counter in his careful handwriting. "I'm staying at the lake house. I'll respect your space. Please call if you need anything." The lake house. The same one he'd shared with her. I crumpled the note and tossed it into the trash. Then I walked into the study, the room where I'd first found the folder, and started clearing it out. Not in anger. Not in mourning. Just clearing space. For me. I boxed up the old papers, the awards, the books we'd collected over the years. In their place, I set up my sewing machine, dusted off from the attic. For the first time in years, I stitched something for myself. 3 months later, Grace hosted Thanksgiving. Robert was invited, mostly for the sake of the grandchildren. He came alone, looking thinner, older, but still wearing that polite professor's smile. We spoke only once that evening. He pulled me aside near the doorway, his voice low. "I've told her, Elaine, everything." She ended it. "She's ashamed." I nodded but said nothing. He swallowed hard. "Mary, I don't expect forgiveness. But I need you to know that I never stopped loving you." I looked at him for a long moment, then said softly, "You loved the idea of me, the stability, the history. But love without truth isn't love, Robert. It's comfort." He blinked, and for a moment, I thought he might cry. But instead, he just nodded and stepped back. That night, I drove home alone, the road stretching before me like a promise. By spring, I'd filed for divorce. It wasn't a grand, cinematic decision. There were no tears on the courthouse steps. Just paperwork, a quiet signature, and a long exhale. Grace came with me for support. Eli didn't come. He said he couldn't bear to see his father again. But he called that night. "I'm proud of you, Mom," he said. "You deserved better." I smiled, even though he couldn't see it. "I got better, sweetheart. I got me." Over time, something beautiful happened. The garden bloomed brighter than it had in years. Neighbors started inviting me out for walks and book clubs. I began teaching part-time at the community center, helping adults learn to read. Something I'd always wanted to do, but never had time for. And every morning, when I made my coffee, I set only one mug on the counter. Black, no sugar. Just for me. Sometimes I'd think of Robert. I'd wonder if he ever found peace, or if the guilt lingered like fog over the lake house. But I didn't wish him harm. I'd simply stopped wishing for anything from him at all. Forgiveness, I learned, isn't a gift you give to someone else. It's the key that unlocks your own cage. It's been 2 years since that dinner. 2 years since the folder slid across the table. Since my husband's hands began to tremble. Since the truth I'd been living beside finally spoke its name. And yet, peace didn't come all at once. It came in pieces. Small, ordinary pieces. Like sunlight through my kitchen window, or the laughter of my grandchildren when they visit on weekends. It came in the quiet, too. Those slow mornings when the only sound is the kettle humming on the stove, and I realize I'm not waiting for footsteps anymore. Sometimes people ask me if I ever regretted exposing him that night. If I wish I'd kept it private, handled it behind closed doors. And I tell them this: truth deserves daylight, because secrets grow stronger in the dark. Robert and I spoke only twice after the divorce papers were signed. The first time was about logistics. The house sale, the accounts, the endless paperwork that comes from untangling a lifetime. The second time was at a cafe near the college, about a year later. He'd asked to meet, said he wanted to talk. When I arrived, he was already there, sitting by the window, the light falling across his face. He looked small, like a man who'd been living inside his own guilt for too long. "Mary," he said softly when I sat down. "You look well." "I am," I replied. "Better than I expected to be." He nodded slowly. "That makes me glad. Truly." There was a long pause before he continued. "I just wanted to tell you, I'm sorry. For all of it. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I needed to say it out loud." I studied his face, the familiar lines around his eyes, the way his hands still trembled when he was nervous. For a moment, I saw the boy I married, the one who brought me wildflowers on our first date, who whispered promises under summer stars. And then I saw the man who'd betrayed every one of those promises. "I forgive you," I said quietly. His head lifted, surprise flickering across his face. "You do?" "Yes," I said. "But forgiveness isn't the same as reunion. It's not a key to the past. It's just peace." He smiled faintly, almost sadly. "I suppose that's more than I deserve." We talked a while longer, about the kids, about the weather, about nothing at all. When we stood to leave, he reached out as if to touch my hand, then stopped halfway. "Take care of yourself, Mary," he said. "I already am," I replied. And I walked out into the sunlight, feeling lighter than I had in decades. The lake house sold the following spring. Grace told me he moved to a small apartment closer to the campus, and that he'd retired early. I didn't ask about Elaine or the other daughter. Some truths don't need revisiting. They've already said everything they were meant to say. Instead, I turned my attention to what was ahead. I started hosting Sunday dinners again. Not out of duty, but joy. Grace and Eli would come, their laughter filling the rooms that once held only silence. We'd sit around the table, tell stories, tease each other, and sometimes we'd talk about him. Not in bitterness, but in understanding. Because even broken families still share roots. One Sunday, my granddaughter asked me, "Grandma, do you miss Grandpa?" I thought for a long time before answering. "I miss the idea of him," I said. "The man I thought he was." But sometimes, when you hold on to a dream too long, it starts to rot in your hands. Letting go isn't failure, sweetheart, it's survival. She nodded, though I'm not sure she understood yet. Maybe one day she will. I've learned that healing doesn't look like forgetting. It looks like remembering without breaking. There are still days when I find little ghosts of him. An old tie in the closet, a photograph tucked between books. When that happens, I don't push the memories away. I sit with them for a moment, let them breathe, and then I put them down again. Because that's what peace really is. Learning to hold the past gently, without letting it crush you. Last month, I turned 65. Grace threw me a small birthday party at her house. There were candles, laughter, the smell of apple pie. At one point, she handed me a photo album she'd made. Pictures from throughout my life. There we were, me and Robert, young and smiling on our wedding day. The kids as toddlers in the backyard. Birthdays, graduations, the small miracles of an ordinary life. And then, tucked near the back, a recent photo of me alone, sitting in my garden with the sun falling across my face. Grace said softly, "That one's my favorite. You look happy." And I realized I was. Not because everything had been easy, but because I'd survived what was meant to break me. Sometimes, late at night, I sit on my porch with a cup of tea and think about that anniversary night. The look in Robert's eyes. The way the candlelight flickered between us. The sound of the folder sliding across the table. It plays in my mind not as a moment of destruction, but of rebirth. Because that was the night I stopped being someone's wife and started being myself again. I tell my story now not to shame him, but to remind anyone listening that truth is not your enemy. It might burn, yes, but sometimes you have to walk through fire to find your way home. And home is wherever peace finally sits down beside you. You still here, baby? I know that was a heavy one. Sometimes the truth don't come easy. It comes like a storm. But storms got a way of cleaning the air, don't they? You see, Mary's story ain't really about betrayal. It's about awakening. About finding out who you are when everything you built comes tumbling down. Some folks spend their whole lives waiting for someone else to make them happy. A husband, a job, a dream that keeps slipping through their fingers. But happiness, real happiness, ain't something you wait on. It's something you build quietly, with both hands, out of the pieces that are left. Mary lost her husband, yes, but she found her peace. She learned that forgiveness isn't about letting somebody off the hook. It's about cutting yourself loose. So if you're listening right now, holding on to some pain that's been eating at you, maybe from yesterday, maybe from years ago, I want you to breathe. Just breathe. You don't have to rush your healing. You don't have to be angry forever. You just have to keep walking toward your own light, one small step at a time. Because peace is waiting for you too, baby. It's always been. Right there, on the other side of truth. Now go on. Rest your heart. You've earned it.